He was a man who had lost everything, a former Marine, living alone in the cold mountains of Colorado. One freezing evening, he found a wounded German shepherd trapped in the snow, and that single act of kindness changed his life forever. Because sometimes, God doesn't send miracles wrapped in shining light sometimes. He sends them quietly, with four paws and eyes that see right through your pain. As the snow kept falling, one man's compassion would uncover a hidden truth, stand against darkness, and lead him toward a woman whose faith was all she had left. Stay till the end. This story will warm your soul and remind you that miracles are real, even in the coldest winter. If this story touches you, please subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Your support helps us bring more stories of faith, hope, and love to life. May God bless you for being here now. Let's begin a Marine's act of kindness that turned into a miracle. The cold wind of late autumn howled through the pines of Silver Creek, a small mountain town nestled against the Colorado Rockies. The sun had already dipped below the ridgeline, leaving behind streaks of amber light struggling against an ocean of gray clouds. The forest smelled of resin and frost, and the earth beneath the towering pines was a frozen mosaic of pine needles and brittle leaves. It was the kind of evening when people locked their doors early and smoke curled from chimneys like ghosts seeking warmth. But Jack Miller was not the kind of man who liked to stay inside. Jack, a 38-year-old former Marine, moved with the quiet discipline of someone used to long patrols in hostile terrain. His square jaw was marked by an old scar running faintly from his cheekbone to the corner of his jaw, something he earned in a desert far from here. His face carried days of stubble, his eyes gray like winter steel, and his shoulders still broad beneath his worn flannel jacket. After his discharge, he had chosen solitude in a small wooden cabin near the edge of the forest, where the silence was sometimes louder than the gunfire he tried to forget. He had learned to live with ghosts, the kind that didn't haunt through fear, but through absence. That afternoon, Jack was out checking the perimeter of his small property line, a habit he never lost from the military. He carried a simple walking stick, though the way he held it made it look like he could use it as a weapon if needed. The sound of the wind shifted, and somewhere in the distance came a sharp, muffled yelp. He froze. It wasn't human. It was the cry of an animal, raw with pain. Jack followed the sound, crunching through the crusted snow, until he found the source, a German shepherd caught in a rusty hunting trap near a fallen pine. The animal was large, strong even in distress, with a sable coat mottled by mud and blood. Its amber eyes glared not from fear, but defiance. The paw caught in the steel jaws trembled slightly, but when Jack knelt nearby, the dog growled low, teeth bared in warning. "Easy, boy," Jack said softly, his voice low and steady, the tone he used to calm young recruits years ago. "I'm not your enemy." The dog's ears flicked, uncertain. Jack slowly reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a strip of dried meat he'd been saving for dinner. He tossed it gently toward the dog, not too close. The animal sniffed the air, hesitated, then licked the meat cautiously. Jack took that as permission to move closer. He examined the trap. Old, illegal, the kind hunters weren't supposed to use anymore. He pressed down the spring lever and pried open the steel jaws. The dog flinched but didn't fight. The moment the paw was free, it stumbled back, limping heavily but not running. Jack tore off part of his sleeve, wrapped it around the wounded leg, and whispered, "You're lucky I found you before the cold did." The dog's breathing slowed. Jack noticed a worn leather collar under the thick fur. The brass tag was scratched but readable. "Rex, Rex, huh? Jack murmured, looking into those amber eyes. Let's get you somewhere warm. He lifted the dog in his arms, surprised by how heavy it was, and trudged back toward the cabin as snow began to fall. The flakes melted against his stubble, and for the first time in months, he felt a strange sense of purpose. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the small stone fireplace. The room smelled of cedar, coffee, and oil from his tools. It was a simple place. One chair, one bed, one shelf filled with old military journals and half-finished wood carvings. Jack laid Rex on a blanket near the fire, cleaned the wound with warm water, and bandaged it properly. The dog watched him, wary but not hostile. Jack poured some leftover chicken broth into a bowl and set it down. Rex sniffed, then began to lap it eagerly. Jack sat back, resting against the wall, feeling an ache in his shoulders that had nothing to do with lifting weight. "You've seen better days," Jack said, his tone quiet but filled with something like sympathy. "So have I." The dog looked up, meeting his gaze, then rested its head on its paws. For a long time, the only sounds were the fire and the wind outside. Jack found himself talking, something he hadn't done in months. He told Rex about his service, about losing brothers in arms, about coming home to a world that didn't quite fit anymore. He didn't know why he was talking. Maybe because the dog didn't interrupt or judge, just listened with those steady amber eyes. By the time the flames died low, Rex was asleep, breathing softly. Jack stood, pulled an old quilt from the bed, and draped it lightly over the animal. The small gesture made him smile, a rare thing these days. "Guess it's good to have company," he whispered. When dawn came, the forest was pale and still. The frost shimmered on the windows, and the air was sharp enough to bite. Jack woke to the soft sound of claws clicking on the wooden floor. Rex stood by the cabin door, tail swishing gently, bandaged leg already bearing weight. The dog glanced back at him, then back to the door, as if saying, "Come on, soldier. It's time." Jack rubbed his eyes, chuckling. "You giving orders now?" But when he saw the focus in Rex's eyes, something inside him shifted. There was intention in that gaze, direction. He put on his coat, grabbed his gloves, and opened the door. The cold air rushed in, full of pine and snow. Rex stepped out first, sniffing the ground, tail high, then looked back once more to make sure Jack followed. The tracks led toward the thick of the forest, faint but certain. Jack hesitated for only a second before locking the cabin door behind him. The morning sun broke through the trees, catching the frost in gold light as man and dog walked side by side into the silent woods, one following the other, neither knowing where the path might lead, only that it was meant to be walked together. The pale morning sun filtered through the pine trees as Jack Miller followed Rex down a narrow path blanketed with fallen leaves. Frost still clung to the edges of the grass, and the cold air carried the smell of wood smoke from distant chimneys. Jack's boots crunched softly against the frozen ground, while Rex moved with steady purpose, his tail low but wagging slightly, as though certain of where he was going. The dog's bandaged leg no longer seemed to bother him much. There was strength and confidence in his stride now, and Jack couldn't help but admire the animal's resolve. They walked for nearly an hour through the thinning forest, until the trees began to give way to open land. Ahead lay the quiet outline of Silver Creek, a small town that looked like it had been frozen in another decade. Old wooden houses leaned slightly with age, their porches creaking in the wind. The main street was empty at this early hour, save for a few parked pickup trucks and the distant sound of a church bell marking 9 o'clock. Jack had rarely come this close to town since leaving the service, Crowds, even small ones, made him uneasy. Rex trotted down a gravel lane lined with frost-bitten fences until he stopped in front of a weathered house near the edge of town. The paint on the siding had peeled away, revealing gray wood beneath. A broken swing hung from the porch beam, swaying lightly. The front yard was small, with wilted chrysanthemums still clinging to life beside the steps. Rex barked once, short and sharp, his ears forward. The door opened. Standing there was a woman in her early 30s, wrapped in a faded brown cardigan over a simple wool dress. Her name, Jack would soon learn, was Grace Thompson. She was of average height, slender but strong in the way people become when they've learned to carry more burdens than they should. Her long chestnut hair was tied loosely at the back, strands escaping to frame a pale face touched by fatigue. Her eyes were a soft hazel, the kind that carried sadness but also a quiet endurance. When she saw Rex, her hands flew to her mouth. "Rex! Oh my God! Rex!" She rushed down the steps, nearly slipping on the frost, and dropped to her knees beside him. Rex's tail thumped against the ground as he leaned into her embrace. Grace's voice cracked with relief. "I thought you were gone for good." Jack stood back a few feet, unsure whether to speak or not. Grace finally looked up at him, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "You found him?" "Found him caught in a trap near the ridge," Jack said. His voice was steady but warm. "He was lucky. Another few hours out there and—" He didn't finish the sentence. Grace nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "He's all I've got left from my father. He passed last winter. Rex kept me sane." She hesitated, as if realizing she had said too much to a stranger. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Jack replied. "He's a good dog. He deserved better." Grace invited him inside, her voice soft but insistent. The living room was small but tidy. An old upright piano stood in one corner, its wood dulled by time. The faint scent of lavender soap mixed with the aroma of stew simmering on the stove. Jack noticed the absence of luxury. Everything here spoke of simplicity and care. "Please stay for dinner," Grace said, glancing nervously toward the pot. "It's not much, but it's the least I can do." Jack hesitated. He wasn't used to company, nor to kindness offered without reason, but the warmth in her tone, the quiet sincerity in her expression, disarmed him. "All right," he said, nodding once. "Thank you." As Grace set the table, Jack watched her move with the precision of someone who had lived alone too long, each action small, deliberate, and slightly guarded. She served potato stew with bits of carrot and onion, simple but filling. "I wish I could offer something better," she said apologetically. Jack smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised. This is the first hot meal I've shared with anyone since I got back." Grace looked up, curiosity in her eyes. "You were in the military?" "Marine Corps," he said. "Served 15 years. Got out 3 years ago." Her expression softened. "That must have been hard, coming home after all that." Jack stirred his stew with his spoon, his gaze distant. "It's different. Out there, you know who you are. Here, you have to figure it out all over again." A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with understanding. Rex lay curled near the fire, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Every now and then his ears twitched at the faint noises outside, but otherwise he seemed content. Home again at last. Grace smiled at the sight. "He's never taken to anyone so quickly," she said quietly. Jack looked at the dog and then at her. "He's got good instincts. Seems like he knows who to trust." Later, As the night deepened, Grace offered him coffee. They sat for a while in the soft light of the kitchen, steam curling from their mugs, the ticking of an old clock filling the silence. Jack found himself talking about the forest, about the quiet life he'd chosen, and she spoke about trying to keep her father's old house despite the growing debts left behind. Neither said much about the loneliness they shared, but it lingered in every pause. When Jack finally rose to leave, Grace walked him to the door. "Thank you again," she said, her voice gentle. "You've done more than you know." Jack nodded, meeting her gaze. He found his way home. That's what matters. As he stepped out into the cold, Rex stood and followed, stopping at the doorway as if torn between two loyalties. Grace smiled, kneeling beside him. "Go on, boy. We'll see him again, won't we?" Jack looked back once, his breath fogging in the chill. "I hope so." He turned toward the quiet street, his boots echoing softly against the frozen ground, the faint sound of the wind carrying behind him the warmth of something long forgotten. Connection. The evening had settled heavy over Silver Creek. A pale moon hung low above the rooftops, casting thin ribbons of silver through the fog that crawled in from the woods. Jack had returned to Grace's house after running an errand to fetch some medical salve for Rex's healing leg. Grace had invited him to stay for coffee. The hour had grown late, but neither seemed in a hurry to end the quiet company. The air was thick with the scent of firewood and freshly brewed coffee. Rex lay near the hearth, his head resting on his paws, ears flicking every now and then at the creaks of the old house. Grace sat opposite Jack at the small dining table, her fingers wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The warm light from the oil lamp softened her features, the fatigue that usually hid behind her smile, the faint worry lines that traced her brow. "I still can't believe Rex found you out there," she said. "It's almost like he knew you'd help." Jack gave a quiet half-smile. "Maybe he was the one helping me." His eyes drifted toward the window, where frost was gathering again along the edges of the glass. "Seems like he's got good timing." Before Grace could reply, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the calm. Headlights flared across the window, cutting harsh beams through the warm light of the room. Rex's ears perked immediately, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Grace frowned, standing slowly. "No one ever visits this late," she murmured, glancing toward the clock. It was nearly 10. Jack's instincts flared awake. He rose from his chair, moving quietly toward the door. "Stay back," he said softly, his voice slipping into that calm command of a man used to control under pressure. 3 men stood outside on the porch. The first, clearly the leader, was a thick-set man in his mid-40s named Vince Carter. His broad shoulders strained against a leather jacket, and a crooked scar split his right eyebrow, giving his face a permanent look of anger. His hair, once dark, had begun to gray at the temples. His reputation around town was the kind that people whispered about, but never challenged directly. Vince had been a small-time loan shark since his 20s, taking over his father's shady business after an altercation that left him with the limp he now tried to hide. Behind him stood 2 younger men, Tommy Reed and Cal Doyle, both in their late 20s, dressed in denim jackets and cheap boots. Tommy was tall and lean with nervous eyes that darted around the porch like a cornered rat's. Cal, broader and heavier, had a permanent smirk that hinted at a cruel sense of amusement. "Evening, Miss Thompson," Vince said, his voice rough and falsely polite. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, but I figured we'd better talk business before it's too late." Grace's face drained of color. "Mr. Carter, it's late. Can't this wait until morning?" "Afraid not," Vince said, stepping she forward. Your daddy left a debt that's come due, and from where I'm standing, you've had plenty of time to settle it. Jack stepped between them before she could answer. His stance was calm, but his presence filled the space like a drawn blade. You're trespassing, he said evenly. You should leave. Vince's lips curled into a mocking grin. And who the hell are you? The new tenant? Just someone who doesn't like seeing a lady cornered. Jack's tone didn't rise, but his eyes, cold and unflinching, made Vince pause before he laughed under his breath. Grace tried to steady her voice. I told you before, I'm working on it. The interest you're charging, it's impossible. I just need more time. Vince's laughter died. Time? Time is money, sweetheart, and you're out of both. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled document, slapping it onto the table beside the doorway. Your old man signed this, and according to this, I've got every right to take this house if the debt ain't cleared by Friday. Jack picked up the paper and scanned it. His sharp eyes caught what most would miss: altered dates, crossed-out numbers, overwritten signatures. The handwriting didn't even match in places. This contract's been doctored, he said flatly. Whoever wrote this doesn't know the first thing about legal formatting. Vince's eyes narrowed. You think you're some kind of lawyer? No, Jack replied, folding the paper neatly. But I know a scam when I see one. Rex stood now, fur bristling, growl deepening. The two younger men shifted uneasily, instinctively taking a step back. Vince scowled. Call off the mutt Before you what? Jack interrupted quietly, his tone low but deadly calm. Make another mistake? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Grace's trembling hand rested on the phone behind her back. Jack caught the motion and gave the slightest nod. She understood. He was buying her time. Vince forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. All right, soldier boy. You've got guts. I'll give you that. Tell you what. Since you're feeling brave, I'll give the lady 48 hours. After that, I come back. And this house is mine. You understand? Jack's expression didn't change. You've made yourself clear. Vince stepped off the porch, glaring back. Enjoy your coffee, hero. We'll see how long that tough act lasts. The truck roared to life, headlights cutting across the snow as it drove off into the dark. The house fell silent again. Grace's hands were shaking as she clutched the table. They won't stop, will they? Jack placed the paper flat, pressing it against the table. Not until they're forced to. He took out his phone and quietly snapped photos of the document. We'll need evidence. Tomorrow, you're going to the police. Tonight, lock every door. Rex padded back to the door and sat guard, gaze fixed on the darkness outside. Jack looked at him and said quietly, Good boy. We'll need those instincts. The fire flickered, throwing long shadows against the walls. Shadows that looked a lot like the kind Jack had been running from for years. Morning came with a curtain of white. Snowflakes drifted down in slow, delicate spirals, covering Silver Creek in a soft silence that made every sound seem sharper. Jack Miller stood outside Grace's house, breath misting in the freezing air. He had barely slept. The image of Vince Carter's smug grin still burned in his mind, and he knew the man would return. Men like Vince didn't bluff. They bullied until someone stopped them. Jack had stopped bullies before, in deserts, in alleys, in places where no law ever reached. Today, he'd do it again, but on his terms. Inside, Grace Thompson sat at the kitchen table, dressed in a gray wool coat and a scarf that had seen better days. Her hands trembled as she sipped her coffee, eyes distant. Are you sure this will work? She asked quietly. Jack glanced at her, the scar on his jaw catching the morning light. We don't fight men like Vince head on. We outthink them. You have the evidence. Let the police handle the law. I'll handle the timing. Rex, sitting near the door, gave a low bark as if agreeing. His wound had nearly healed, and his fur glistened against the pale light. Jack bent to scratch behind his ear. You ready, boy? Rex's tail thumped once, steady and sure. By mid-morning, Jack had everything set. He parked his old pickup truck along the narrow road leading out of town, a place where the snow piled thick and vehicles had to slow down to avoid skidding. He set his phone on a dashboard mount, camera running. His plan was simple. Get Vince to admit the threats on record while Grace took the evidence to the sheriff. As he waited, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind carried faint church bells from town, the kind that reminded him of Christmas mornings from a lifetime ago. Then came the sound of an engine grinding through the snow. Jack's gray eyes narrowed as a black truck appeared, headlights slicing through the haze. Vince Carter stepped out first, the heavy crunch of his boots marking his arrival. He wore the same leather jacket from last night, though this morning his face looked meaner, more desperate. Behind him were his two enforcers, Tommy Reed, with his restless eyes and thin frame, and Cal Doyle, whose smirk was gone, replaced by a look of nervous tension. They weren't expecting resistance today. They were expecting surrender. Well, if it isn't our hero, Vince called out, voice dripping with mockery. Out here all alone? You make this too easy. Jack leaned against his truck, calm as still water. You said 48 hours, he reminded him. You're early. Vince shrugged. Thought I'd get a head start. Paperwork's easier when the house is empty. Jack's phone camera blinked red in the corner of the windshield. You ever stop to wonder, he said, how many laws you're breaking trying to take a house that doesn't belong to you? Vince's grin widened. Not if the debt's real. Interest. Adds up, pal. That's how business works. 30% interest a month isn't business, Jack said flatly. It's extortion. That got Vince's attention. His nostrils flared. Watch your mouth, soldier boy. You don't know who you're dealing with. I think I do, Jack replied. A man who threatens widows and forges signatures. The words hit home. Vince took a step closer, anger flaring. You better shut your mouth before you what? Jack's tone sharpened, cutting across the wind. Beat it out of her? Burn the place down? Go on, say it. You've already said worse. Vince froze mid-step, realizing too late that his temper had led him right into the trap. Behind Jack, Rex rose from where he'd been lying in the snow, ears forward, growl low and steady. The two thugs shifted uneasily, hands half raised as if to show they wanted no trouble. What's the matter, Vince? Jack said, his voice calm again. Getting nervous now that someone's recording? Vince's face twisted. Recording? You son of a... Before he could finish, sirens pierced the mountain silence. Red and blue lights flickered through the falling snow as a police cruiser turned the corner. Grace had made it to the sheriff just in time. The truck's door opened, and Sheriff Alan Reeves stepped out. A tall man in his 50s with a thick gray mustache and a build that still carried his years as a state trooper. His uniform was crisp despite the weather, his tone measured but firm. Morning, gentlemen. Got a report of illegal loan activity and threats of violence. Guess who fits the description? Vince's bravado faltered. This is a mistake, he snapped, but his voice cracked. The sheriff nodded toward Jack. You mind sharing what you've got, Mr. Miller? Jack played the recording from his phone. Vince's voice came through clear, his threats and interest rates laid bare. Reeves's eyes hardened. That's enough, he said. Vince Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and criminal coercion. As the deputies cuffed Vince and his men, Rex stood beside Jack, snow dusting his dark fur, gaze steady. Grace's car pulled up moments later, and she stepped out, her face pale but resolute. When she saw the cuffs on Vince's wrists, she exhaled, as though finally releasing a breath she'd held for years. It's over, Jack said quietly. Grace nodded, her voice soft but firm. No, Jack, it's finally beginning. The sheriff gave them a nod before leading the men away. Snow continued to fall, muffling the world once more. Jack looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail slowly, then back at Grace. Let's get you home, he said. She smiled faintly and took his arm as they walked toward her car, leaving behind the tracks that would soon vanish under the falling snow. That night, Silver Creek lay hushed under a thin blanket of snow. The storm had passed, leaving the streets washed in white, the lamps glowing softly like candles in a church. The air smelled clean, sharp, and new. Grace Thompson stood by her window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The past 24 hours had felt like a lifetime. She could still see the flashing police lights, hear Vince's curses fading into the distance, and the steady voice of Jack Miller telling her, "It's over." Yet in her heart, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something beginning. On the table lay an opened envelope, freshly delivered by a police officer earlier that evening. The printed letter bore the official seal of the County Court of Larimer, a notice of temporary suspension of foreclosure proceedings pending an investigation into loan fraud. Grace exhaled shakily as she reread the line confirming that all repossession activity was frozen. She whispered softly, as though to convince herself, "It's really over." Rex, lying near the fire, lifted his head at the sound of her voice. His golden brown eyes gleamed in the firelight, full of that quiet intelligence that seemed almost human. His leg had healed well. Only a faint scar remained beneath his fur. When Grace reached down to stroke him, he pressed his head gently against her palm. "You brought him to me, didn't you, boy?" she said with a faint smile. "You always find a way." A knock sounded at the door. Steady, familiar. Grace set down her cup and opened it to find Jack standing there, snow still clinging to his shoulders. He looked different tonight, relieved, maybe even lighter. His rugged face, often hardened by habit, now carried a faint softness around the eyes. His flannel jacket was dusted white, and his breath curled in the cold. "Evening," he said simply. "Just checking in. Thought you might have heard from the sheriff by now." Grace nodded, her lips parting into a genuine smile. "I did. They're freezing the foreclosure. The sheriff said your recording helped nail down the fraud. Vince will be facing charges." Jack gave a small nod. "Good. He won't bother you again." He hesitated a moment, glancing past her into the warm glow of the house. "Mind if I step in? The snow's getting thick out here." "Of course," she said, stepping aside. "You don't need to ask." He entered, shaking the snow from his boots. The fire crackled softly as he settled his hands near it, the heat drawing color back into his fingers. Grace poured 2 cups of tea, handing one to him. "I was going to cook something simple," she said, a touch shy. "Nothing fancy, just carrot soup. Would you like to stay for dinner tomorrow? As a proper thank you?" Jack took the cup, steam curling into his face. "I'd like that." His voice was low, almost rough with sincerity. "Maybe I can earn it. That kitchen of yours looks like it could use a little work. I can fix the cabinet hinges, maybe replace that cracked counter." Grace laughed softly, a sound that felt like music breaking through winter silence. "I wouldn't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble," he said. "I could use something to keep my hands busy. Been a while since I fixed anything that wasn't broken inside my head." The words hung there, heavier than he meant them to be. Grace looked at him with quiet empathy but didn't pry. Instead, she said, "Then it's a deal. Dinner and repairs." Outside, the wind picked up again, blowing snow across the porch. Rex moved to the doorway, sitting with that alert stillness of a guardian. Jack followed his gaze toward the quiet street, then turned back. "He's a good dog," he said softly. "He's family," Grace replied. "The only family I've had for a long time." Jack nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe that's about to change." Grace looked up at him, startled for just a moment, but she saw no boldness in his face, only honesty. The fire flickered, reflecting in both their eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they didn't yet have words for. Jack stood, pulling on his coat again. "I should get back before the road ice is over, but I'll come by tomorrow. We'll see what we can do about that kitchen." Grace followed him to the door. The night outside was a quiet ocean of white. Snowflakes drifted lazily around the porch light as Rex padded forward to stand beside them. Jack looked back once, offering a faint, rare smile. "You'll be all right now," he said. Grace nodded. "Because of you." "Because of you," he corrected gently, and tipped his head before stepping into the night. She watched him walk down the path until the snow swallowed his figure, Rex's ears twitching as if memorizing his footsteps. Then she closed the door, the fire still glowing, the air still warm with his presence. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or shining light. They come quietly, through kindness, courage, and a loyal heart. When Jack stopped to help a wounded dog in the snow, he didn't know he was saving more than one life. God often works in ways we cannot see, guiding lost souls toward each other, turning pain into purpose and loneliness into love. Maybe that's His way of reminding us, no act of compassion is ever wasted. Somewhere out there, a simple gesture, a hand extended, a door left open, a meal shared, might just be the miracle someone prayed for. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more stories of faith, love, and redemption. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He guide your steps, protect your home, and fill your heart with the quiet miracles you might not yet see.